What's up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of the CotAcasT. My name is Brian Bermudez, and I'm the host of the Craft of the Air podcast. The podcast not just for aviation enthusiasts or professionals, but also those with a general interest in aviation. Join us on our journey as we explore the horizon of aviation together. We look at it, man. We dive in to everything hitting aviation this week, and we asked the question: are airlines demanding trouble? We'll be discussing the latest developments in the aviation industry, this including Southwest Airlines, a recent nationwide ground stop, and this was due to a computer issue and that resulted in 1,500 flight delays. But that's not all. The U.S. airlines, they're facing a looming tsunami of pilot retirements and a Twitter debate that erupted after baseball pitcher Anthony Bass claimed that a flight attendant asked his pregnant wife to clean up after their child. And we'll also be talking about United Airlines, their recent financial losses, but their optimistic outlook for the coming quarter, as well as the French court's decision to acquit Air France and Airbus over the 2009 Rio-Paris crash. This left families and victims devastated. We dive into all of these topics hitting the aviation news this week. First things first, today's episode of the CotAcasT is brought to you by Craft of the Air. Not understanding or don't have enough time to study your aviation maintenance content? Are you in the field of aviation and you're tired of searching endlessly for unreliable aviation data? You're checking Chat GPT, you're texting this person, you have this tab open, you're checking old textbooks. Hey, stop it. Craft of the Air is a second you when you need it. Anything aviation. Consulting by Coda has resources that will excel any aviation project, and they take a personalized approach to each client's needs. And they offer personalized advice regarding innovative solutions and content to help you make confident decisions. FAA licensed professionals and the aviation knowledge experts get it from Coda. Are you an A&P student? Test your airman's knowledge before the federal A&P license exams, or expand your current aviation maintenance knowledge. Cram by Coda offers aviation maintenance learning solutions that can support and help you with training school, FAA, and career exams, and they're tailored for you by a certified A&P subject matter expert. Visit www.craftoftheair.com. Again, that's www.craftoftheair.com today. Craft of the Air. So now we begin with
Southwest
and just in a negative manner here. No good news coming out of Southwest. Big debacle, mishap part 2 with Southwest. Southwest Airlines resumed flights on Tuesday. Now, this was after a nationwide ground stop, which caused by a reported, quote, computer issue, end quote. This computer issue led for over 1,500 flight delays. The Federal Aviation Administration, they lifted a ground stop at the carrier's request shortly after 10 a.m. Now, this was an internal technical issue, and it was caused by, according to Southwest, a vendor-supplied firewall. This resulted in an unexpected loss of connection to some operational data. The outage lasted for about 30 minutes before being fixed, and flights were eventually resumed. Now, despite this quick resolution, Southwest had already delayed 1,500 flights on Tuesday. This represented about 30% of the total flight schedule for that day for Southwest. The airline is obviously still recovering from a massive operational meltdown back in December 2022, and this resulted in cancellations of over 16,700 flights. That's during the holidays due to winter storms and that overwhelmed crew and rescheduling. It affected 2 million travelers and cost over $1 billion. Southwest issued an apology to its customers for the delays on Tuesday. Quote, Southwest has resumed operations and temporarily pausing flight activity this morning to work through data connection issues. End quote. Southwest said this in a statement on its website Tuesday morning. They also said, quote, we offer our heartfelt apologies to the customers who, on their journey with us today, might have been affected, end quote. It's tough to see where that goes, and at what point does an airline start to lose their loyal customers, the people that trust them the most. And we move right along to what is interesting. An article reported just today by CNN, and interestingly enough, we look at a possible nightmare of a pilot shortage, and it really comes to light now during a House Transportation and Infrastructure Subcommittee hearing on Wednesday. Faye Black, president and CEO of Regional Airline Association, he warned Congress that U.S. airline industry is facing a severe and an ongoing pilot shortage. Now, according to Mr. Black, the industry is about to be hit with a, quote, tsunami of pilot retirements, end quote. That will further limit flight availability for passengers and put upward pressure, let's be honest, on the fees. Now, more than half the pilots currently working will hit a mandatory retirement age of 65 within just the next 15 years. Younger pilots are not making up for those who are aging out. Shortages nationwide, with 42 states having less airline service now than before the pandemic. And additionally, 136 airports have lost at least a quarter of their service. Airlines have completely cut off flights to 11 airports in smaller cities. And so it's interesting to see where this shortage goes. Mr. Black's group, they represent a regional carrier which provide feeder service for larger airlines such as American, United, Delta. Now, those major airlines, they're also facing big shortages for pilots. Now, they've been hiring pilots away from regional carriers, and this is causing an even worse problem for passengers in cities which are dependent upon these regional carriers. The union, most U.S. airlines pilots urged Congress against changing pilot qualifications and training standards in an attempt to address this pilot shortage, saying that some ideas would compromise safety, and I strongly agree with this. Jason Ambrose, the president of the Airline Pilots Association, he warned that some proposals would weaken safety standards and claimed that essentially airlines are understaffed due to inadequate pay and the quality of life conditions, as well as management decisions during the pandemic. I strongly agree. Now, there's also been a significant lack of diversity, particularly amongst pilots, and who tend to be mostly male and mostly white. Now, the hearing discussed potential ways to address this issue, which could also help to address any pilot shortages, right? Now, it's worth noting that there was a shortage of pilots even before the pandemic. Now, although airlines received billions of dollars of taxpayers' money during the pandemic, with strict adherence or direction not to lay off staff, many airlines offered buyouts and early retirement packages to trim the cost of the pandemic. So this greatly impacted the pipeline of new pilots. Greatly. Now, one must move on. Going on to United Airlines is something very interesting. I'm a big baseball fan. A couple of things with United, but we look at what's popping up here, and Toronto Blue Jays pitcher Anthony Bass, he sparked a heated debate on Twitter when he claimed that United Airlines flight attendant forced his pregnant wife, to clean up a mess left by their daughter, mid-flight. I just couldn't believe it. Now, in a series of tweets, Bass complained that his wife, who was 22 weeks pregnant, she was made to, he said, quote, get on her hands and knees and pick up the popcorn left by my youngest daughter, end quote. That's uncalled for. His sister-in-law, country singer Jessie James Decker, also chimed in, saying that her sister was humiliated and exhausted with the children. And this is while everybody was watching. Now, this is, however, Bass he faced backlash on Twitter, as many sided with the flight crew. Yes. The Association of Flight Attendants released a statement emphasizing that crew members and travelers, they share the same space, and that strict safety rules must be followed by everybody. The union declined to specifically address the Bass complaint, stating that commenting on the incident without the information likely wouldn't help. I agree with that, but we have the information, don't we? I don't know. Do we? You're listening to the CotAcasT. You got it. You're listening. While it's unclear what exactly transpired on the flight, etiquette consultant Jacqueline Whitmore, she's a former flight attendant, she called the flight attendants' alleged behavior, quote, unprofessional, end quote. Whitmore urged travelers to be more considerate and clean up after themselves, but emphasized that it's not the passenger's responsibility to clean up a mess caused by their child. Bass, who has also played for several other teams throughout his career, he's currently on his second tour duty with the Toronto Blue Jays. His wife did not immediately respond for messages, seeking comment. United Airlines representatives were also unavailable for comment. Now, staying with United Airlines, some interesting reports that we get, some interesting news. United Airlines reported a loss of $194 million in the first quarter. Now, this is while its revenue actually increased compared to its previous year. Now, despite economic uncertainty, the airline stated that customer demand is strong. And they actually predicted that it's slightly better results than what Wall Street anticipated for April through June, the quarter. Now, like Delta Airlines, United is experiencing a higher labor and fuel costs than in the past years. But they're optimistic about the sales for critical summer travel. Now, and it's going to be critical for the summer travel. CEO Scott Kirby, he commented on the company's economic risks, and he stated that they're monitoring them closely. United plans to actually take advantage of strong international demand, and what they're going to do is they're going to expand service to Australia and New Zealand. That's going to be by 40% next winter. The airline will introduce a new service and added flights on existing routes. That's going to be from San Francisco and Los Angeles to Christchurch and Auckland in New Zealand, Sydney, Brisbane in Australia. So a lot of good stuff coming out from United. A private data from a Bank of America and JP Morgan Chase, they actually support United's claim of the strong international bookings and the reports that domestic travel is experiencing a slowdown in just the recent weeks. Now, we move on to some somewhat sad news. Somewhat of some sad aviation news here. And we go to Air France and Airbus being acquitted. Now, a French court, they acquitted Airbus and Air France over the 2009 Rio-Paris crash. Now, this was a decision that has dealt a devastating blow to the families and the victims who have spent the last 14 years seeking justice. Now, the court had ruled that the errors on the two companies could not be proven to be the cause of the disaster. The prosecutors had already recommended that the Paris court not to seek out a conviction. Now, although the verdict was not unexpected, it's left the families and the victims in a state of shock and dismay. Daniel Lemmy, the president of the association that represents the victims, he expressed disgust at the verdict, and he called it an impartial judgment. Now, she described 14 years of waiting as, quote, despair, dismay, and anger, end quote. Now, this trial, which lasted for about 8 weeks, it focused on the role of the defective pitot tubes, which measure the flight speed of the aircraft. The court had heard how a malfunction would cause the tubes, which became blocked, to form with ice crystals during a mid-Atlantic storm. Now, this caused alarms to sound in the cockpit of an Airbus A330. Now, the autopilot system was switched off in this tragedy. Technical experts, they pointed out that after the instrument failure, pilots put the plane into a climb that caused the aircraft to lose upward lift and from air moving over the wings, thus losing at the altitude. Now, Air France and Airbus, they blamed the pilot error as the main cause of crash. Now, while lawyers for the families, they urged that both companies were aware of the pitot tube problem before the crash, and that these pitot tubes were not trained to deal with such altitude emergencies. Now, the court acknowledged that Airbus, quote, 4 acts of imprudence or negligence, end quote, including not replacing certain models of those pitot tubes that seemed to freeze more often on its A330 340 fleet. The quote also said, quote, withholding information, end quote, from flight operators. It also found that Air France had committed 2, quote, acts of imprudence, end quote, in its way to disseminating an informational note on the faulty tubes to its pilots. And that's very interesting. You see these facts, but then you see the verdict. Now, the decision to acquit Air France and Airbus, it's a better pill for the families or the victims who have already endured years of waiting for justice, and a very bitter pill for these families. Prosecutors had initially dropped charges against the companies in 2019. This was a decision that had angered victims' families. A Paris appeals court overturned the decision in 2021, and they ordered the trial to go forward. So, from nationwide ground stops of Southwest Airlines due to computer issues causing delays to the looming tsunami of pilot retirements facing the U.S. airlines. We also discussed the controversial tweet by baseball player Anthony Bass claiming the flight attendant asking his pregnant wife to clean up after the child, and United Airlines' financial struggles despite a Q2 turnaround. And lastly, we look at the verdict of Air France in the Airbus case, where they were acquitted over the 2009 Rio-Paris crash. I asked the listener, are there airlines asking for trouble by becoming too complacent? Or is the industry just changing in a way that should be expected? Will these types of topics become the norm in aviation? Only time will tell. With that being said, that wraps it up for this week's episode of the CotAcasT. If you guys have not done so already, check out the Craft of the Air website at www.craftoftheair.com. Again, that's www.craftoftheair.com, and get your free initial consultation today. Craft of the Air, our craft is of the air. Comments or suggestions about this or future episodes, let's get in touch. Go to www.craftoftheair.com and put in the subject CotAcasT. Thanks again, guys, for listening to today's episode of the CotAcasT. Be sure to follow us and subscribe on the Craft of the Air Instagram, Twitter, and we have a YouTube channel now with the latest. And this is so you can get the latest CotAcasT episode updates, and you can rate and review the CotAcasT. We're now streaming on Spotify, Apple, Prime, Pandora, Stitcher, and Google Podcasts, all platforms. Thanks again, guys, for listening. Have a great day. Be safe, and we'll be seeing you soon.